No one noticed it at first. Not the drivers hurrying through downtown traffic. Not the assistants glued to their phones. Not even the security men trained to spot danger before it breathed. No one noticed that on a clear Tuesday morning, when the sun poured generously over glass towers and clean sidewalks, Elliot Grayson walked without a shadow. He stepped out of his black sedan at exactly 8:07 a.m., the same time he had for years. The billionaire founder of Grayson Tech was known for routines so precise they felt mechanical. Same building, same floor, same coffee, black, no sugar, same calm nod to the doorman who admired him quietly, same confidence that made strangers straighten their backs when he passed. But that morning the light betrayed him. Dear friends, before we continue, kindly like and heat the subscription button on your screen. Elliot paused briefly on the marble steps of his headquarters, adjusting his cufflinks. The sun was behind him. It should have followed him faithfully, stretching his silhouette across the ground like it always did. It didn't. A chill slid through his spine, sharp and sudden, like walking through an unexpected draft. He glanced down instinctively. Nothing. No dark outline. No familiar shape mimicking his movements. Just clean stone, bright and empty. Elliot frowned, took a step forward, then another. Still nothing. Probably the angle, he muttered to himself, forcing a quiet laugh. A man worth billions could not afford superstition. He had built his empire on logic, data, and decisions made without emotion. Shadows did not simply disappear. Yet as he entered the building, the feeling followed him, heavy, unsettling, as though something essential had been left behind. Across the city in a modest hospital room overlooking a parking lot and a lonely oak tree, Lila Grayson opened her eyes. She was 12 years old and painfully thin, her arms resting like fragile branches atop white sheets. Machines hummed softly around her, blinking patiently, faithfully. Lila had been sick for so long that sickness felt like a second name. She turned her head slowly, searching the room. "Dad?" she whispered. Elliot had promised he would be there when she woke. 3 months earlier, Elliot Grayson's life had shattered in a way money could not repair. Leela had collapsed at school without warning. One moment she was laughing with friends, the next she was on the floor as teachers screamed for help. Tests followed, then more tests. Specialists flew in from across the country. Words like rare, complex, and uncertain filled conference rooms. And then came the sentence that hollowed Elliot out completely. "We're doing everything we can, but her condition isn't responding the way we hoped." Elliot had built skyscrapers where empty lots once stood. He had changed industries, influenced policy, and funded research that carried his name. He was used to winning, but this did not bend. Each night he sat beside Lila's bed, long after visiting hours ended, holding her hand, listening to the quiet rhythm of machines. Bargaining silently with anything that might be listening. "Take my money. Take my company. Take my years. Just don't take her." The first time the stranger appeared, Elliot thought exhaustion was finally winning. It was late. Nearly midnight. The hospital corridor was silent except for the echo of his footsteps and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Elliot leaned against a window, rubbing his eyes. "You look like a man running out of light." The voice came from behind him. Elliot turned sharply. A man stood near the vending machines, tall, calm, dressed plainly, as though he belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. "Visiting hours are over," Elliot said, irritation masking his fatigue. The man smiled gently. "I'm not here to visit. I'm here because you are." Elliot scoffed. "I don't have time for riddles." "No," the man agreed. "You have a daughter." The words hit harder than they should have. Elliot straightened. "Who are you?" "Someone who trades in things people don't realize they own." The man's gaze flicked toward the window, where the city lights glowed like stars fallen to earth. "Things like hope," he continued softly, "time and shadows." Elliot laughed once sharply. "Get some sleep," he said, turning away. But the man's final words followed him down the corridor. "When the light stops following you, you'll know where to find me." Now standing in his office hours later, Elliot stared at the floor where his shadow should have been. The memory of that voice returned, unwanted and clear. When the light stops following you, Elliot backed away slowly, his heart pounding. He moved toward the window. The sun blazed high above the city. People walked below, their shadows stretching obediently beside them. Everyone except him. A knock broke the silence. "Mr. Grayson," his assistant called, "the hospital is online too. It's about Lila." Elliot didn't wait for the rest. He grabbed his coat and ran. By the time he reached the hospital, Lila was asleep again, her breathing shallow but steady. Elliot sank into the chair beside her, pressing her hand to his cheek. "I'm here," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm always here." Her fingers twitched faintly. Outside the room, the hallway lights flickered once. And then, as if stepping out from between seconds, the stranger stood at the end of the corridor, waiting. Elliot looked up slowly. Their eyes met. No words were spoken, but understanding passed between them like a contract already signed. The stranger inclined his head toward the shadows cast by the walls, long, dark, and silent. Elliot swallowed hard. For the first time in his life, the billionaire who had everything realized something terrifying. Some prices are not paid with money, and some bargains, once made, follow you even when your shadow does not. The corridor felt longer than it should have. Elliot walked toward the stranger as though the air itself resisted him. Each step echoed, too loud, too slow, like the hospital had stretched time just to listen. Nurses passed without glancing at the man standing there, as if he were part of the building, an unremarkable shadow among many. But Elliot saw him clearly. "You said I'd know where to find you," Elliot said, his voice low. "I didn't expect it to be here." The stranger smiled faintly. Where else would a desperate father go? Elliot clenched his jaw. "My daughter is sick. If you're here to mock that, I'm here because you would trade the sun itself if it meant she could see another morning." Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. Elliot looked back toward Lila's room. The machines continued their steady rhythm, unaware of bargains and fate. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "To show you a place," the man replied, "and offer you a choice." They didn't walk out of the hospital, not exactly. One moment Elliot stood under harsh white lights. The next the world tilted, like stepping off a curb that wasn't there, and the floor beneath him softened into something like cool sand. They stood in a vast open space that felt both indoors and endless. Above them, no sky, only a shifting glow, neither day nor night. Around them stretched rows of stalls, quiet and orderly, like a marketplace after closing. Each stall displayed something impossible. A woman's laughter, bottled and glowing faintly, a pocket watch ticking backward, a stack of unopened letters labeled "Words Never Said." Elliot's breath caught. "What is this place?" "The exchange," the stranger said simply, "where people come when money fails them." Elliot took a cautious step forward. "This isn't real." "Your shadow is gone," the man replied, "and yet here you stand." Elliot looked down instinctively. Still nothing. They stopped before a stall that looked almost empty. No objects, no lights, just a polished surface that reflected Elliot's face back at him. "You've lived your life in the spotlight," the stranger said. "Power follows you. Influence bends around you. But your greatest treasure has always been simpler." Elliot swallowed. "My daughter," the man nodded, "and you would give anything for her." Elliot's reflection stared back at him. Tired eyes, lines etched by worry, a man suddenly older than his years. "What are you offering?" Elliot asked. "Time," the stranger said, "a healing path no one else can open, a future where she runs, laughs, grows old enough to forget hospital rooms." Elliot's heart surged painfully. "And the cost?" The stranger gestured downward. "Your shadow." Elliot laughed, hollow and disbelieving. "That's it? This is some kind of trick." "Your shadow," the man repeated, voice calm, "is the proof of your presence in the light. It is the echo of your existence. Without it, you will walk unseen in ways you cannot yet imagine." Elliot shook his head. "People live without a lot of things." "Yes," the stranger agreed, "but not without consequence." Images flickered across the empty stall. Elliot saw himself standing at the edge of a boardroom table, speaking, while executives stared past him, confused, unsettled, as if something were missing. He saw cameras glitch when pointed at him, his outline just slightly wrong. He saw people hesitate when shaking his hand, unable to explain the unease crawling up their arms. "You will still be rich," the stranger continued. "Still powerful, but slowly, subtly, the world will stop holding you the way it used to." "And Lila?" Elliot whispered. The images shifted. Lila running barefoot through grass. Lila laughing under sunlight. Lila standing tall, healthy, alive. Elliot's chest tightened until breathing hurt. "How long?" he asked. "How long before the world notices?" "That depends," the stranger said, "on how brightly you try to stand in the light." Elliot turned away, pacing. "This is madness." "And yet," the stranger replied gently, "you're considering it." Elliot stopped. He thought of the nights Lila cried quietly so he wouldn't hear, the way she smiled bravely when doctors entered the room, the way her hand felt smaller every week in his. What was a shadow compared to that? "What happens to it?" Elliot asked quietly. The stranger's eyes darkened, just a fraction. "It will belong to the exchange, and it will remember you." A chill crept up Elliot's spine. "Remember me how?" "As all things do," the man said. "As something once owned, now lost." Elliot returned to Lila's bedside before dawn. He watched her sleep, memorizing the rise and fall of her chest, the faint crease between her brows. He imagined a future without this room, without wires and whispered fears. "I'd do anything," he murmured. "Anything." The lights flickered. When Elliot looked up, the stranger stood near the door. "Once agreed," the man said, "there is no undoing." Elliot stood slowly. He glanced one last time at his daughter. "Do it." The stranger stepped forward. The air thickened as though the room itself leaned in to witness the moment. A pressure settled around Elliot's feet, cold and weightless at once. For a brief instant, pain flared. Not physical, but deeper, like losing a memory you didn't know you needed. Then it was done. The stranger stepped back. Somewhere far away, a shadow detached itself from the light. Morning came gently. Doctors rushed in with surprised voices and cautious smiles. Numbers changed. Readings stabilized. Whispers of improvement floated through the room like fragile hope. Elliot stood quietly in the corner, unnoticed by everyone but Lila. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "Dad, you look tired." Elliot forced a smile. "I'm okay," he said, but as sunlight streamed through the window, it spilled across the floor, over chairs, machines, and walls, and stopped short of him. Lila frowned, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she sensed something missing but couldn't name it. Elliot turned away before she could ask, because deep down, he already felt it. The cost had been paid, and the bill had only just begun. The first sign was not fear, it was confusion. Elliot noticed it in the smallest places. The kind of moments no one ever writes down. A receptionist hesitated when he said his name, her fingers hovering over the keyboard a second too long. A security guard scanned his badge twice, frowning as if the screen refused to cooperate with what his eyes were seeing. "System glitch," they always muttered. Elliot nodded and moved on, but each time, something inside him tightened. Because glitches don't follow a man everywhere? Lila improved quickly. Too quickly, the doctor said. Words like remarkable and unexpected filled the room now. Color returned to her cheeks. Strength crept back into her limbs. She laughed more, softly at first, then freely. Elliot sat by her bed, smiling, clapping, praising every tiny victory. And yet, every morning, the sun rose faithfully and refused to claim him. The shadowless space at his feet became a private reminder of what he had given up. One afternoon, Lila stared at the floor beside his chair. "Dad," she said slowly, "why doesn't the light make you look whole?" Elliot's breath caught. He followed her gaze. The sunlight stretched long across the room, painting everything in gold, except him. He forced a chuckle. "You've been in here too long," he said gently. "Your eyes are playing tricks on you." Lila didn't smile back. "Promise me you're okay," she whispered. Elliot nodded, but the lie tasted bitter. The boardroom was the next place the light failed him. Elliot stood at the head of the table, delivering a presentation he had rehearsed for weeks. His voice was steady, his tone confident. The numbers were flawless. And yet, faces around the table drifted. Eyes slid away from him, landing on screens, notepads, windows. A man yawned openly. Another checked his phone without apology. Elliot paused. "Is something unclear?" he asked. Silence. Then his chief financial officer cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, Elliot. Could you repeat that last part?" He had just said it, slowly, carefully. The meeting ended early. As executives filed out, Elliot caught fragments of whispered conversation. "He seems different. I can't put my finger on it. Like he's not fully here." Elliot remained alone in the room long after they left. He walked to the window. Dozens of shadows danced across the floor. Chairs, tables, passing clouds, all obedient, all except his. That night, Elliot dreamed for the first time since the bargain. He stood in an empty street under a frozen sun. Buildings loomed on either side, tall and silent. He called out, but his voice echoed back wrong, thinner than it should have been. Then he saw it, his shadow. It stood several feet away, upright and still, shaped like him, but darker, heavier. When it moved, it did not follow. It watched. "Come back," Elliot said, stepping forward. The shadow tilted its head. "You sold me," it whispered, not in sound, but in understanding. Elliot woke with his heart pounding, sweat soaking the sheets. The room was dark, but in the faint glow from the hallway, something moved along the wall. Just for a second. The next morning, Elliot tried something reckless. He stood in front of a mirror in his penthouse apartment and flooded the room with light. Every lamp, every window open wide. Sunlight poured in, relentless and bright. Still nothing. He raised his hand. The light passed through, obedient to the rules of the world, but the proof of his presence was gone. Elliot sank into a chair, gripping his temples. "This isn't how it was supposed to be," he whispered. The stranger's words returned uninvited. "That depends on how brightly you try to stand in the light." People began forgetting small things. A longtime employee called him Sir instead of his name. A journalist misquoted him repeatedly. A driver arrived late, confused about the pickup. Even Lila, stronger now, sometimes stared at him with a flicker of uncertainty, like someone searching for a word on the tip of their tongue. "Dad," she said one evening, voice hesitant, "did you always wear that watch?" Elliot looked down at his wrist. The watch had been a gift from her mother before she passed. "Yes," he said softly, "always." Lila nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. That night, Elliot returned to the hospital corridor where he had first met the stranger. He stood there for hours. "I upheld my end," he said aloud. "You said she would be safe." The lights dimmed. The stranger appeared calm as ever. "She is healing," he replied. "And I'm disappearing," Elliot shot back. The stranger studied him. "You are becoming what you agreed to be." Elliot's voice cracked. "I didn't know it would be like this." "No one ever does," the man said. "A shadow carries more than shape. It carries weight, memory, the proof that light acknowledges you." Elliot swallowed. "Can I see it?" The stranger's gaze sharpened. "Seeing it may cost more than you're ready to pay." Elliot laughed bitterly. "What's left to lose?" The stranger stepped closer. "Your place in her memory." Elliot froze. "Be careful," the man continued softly. "A father can live without recognition, but a child should never wake up one day unsure if the man in front of her belongs to her past." The warning echoed long after the stranger vanished. Days passed, then weeks. Lila was discharged. She walked out of the hospital under her own strength, sunlight wrapping around her like a promise fulfilled. Elliot followed a step behind. People clapped. Nurses smiled. Doctors shook hands. The light cast long shadows across the ground. Everyone's shadow, except his. Leela turned back once, reaching for him instinctively. Her hand hesitated in midair. For the first time since her illness began, fear crossed her face. "Dad?" she asked quietly. Elliot's heart fractured. "I'm here," he said, stepping forward. But deep inside, a terrifying thought took root. What happens when the person you saved no longer remembers who saved her? Lila's recovery should have felt like a miracle, and in many ways it was. She returned home to a life that had been paused, school books waiting on her desk, sneakers by the door, a bedroom that still smelled faintly of childhood. Sunlight streamed through the windows each morning, warm and generous, filling the house with hope. But hope, Elliot learned, can coexist with fear. The first time it happened, he almost missed it. They sat at the breakfast table, pancakes cooling on plates. Lila laughed at something on her tablet, then looked up at him, smiling. "Could you pass the syrup?" she asked politely. Politely. Not Dad. Not with the familiar shorthand of love and ease. Just a careful request, as if he were a guest. Elliot passed the bottle with steady hands. "Of course." She smiled again, but there was a pause afterward, a subtle tilt of her head like she was trying to place him. That pause became longer each day. Elliot withdrew from public life. Board meetings were canceled, interviews postponed. His name appeared less frequently in headlines than not at all. The world adjusted quickly, as it always does when someone steps out of the light. At home, Elliot tried to stay small. He cooked meals. He folded laundry. He drove Lila to school and waited in the car, watching as she joined friends who spoke and laughed without a trace of memory of hospital rooms or fragile breaths. One afternoon, she waved goodbye, then hesitated. "You're picking me up later, right?" she asked. "Yes," Elliot replied softly. "Like always." She nodded, but uncertainty flickered across her face. Elliot turned away before she could see the pain in his eyes. That night, the house grew strangely quiet, not peaceful, empty. Elliot stood in the living room, lights off, moonlight spilling across the floor. The furniture cast long, familiar shadows. Then one moved, slowly, not following the rules of light. Elliot's breath caught. "I know that's you." The shadow detached itself from the wall, deepening, thickening, until it stood upright across from him. It was his shape, but heavier, darker, edged with something like resentment. "You're fading," it said without sound. "You're taking her from me," Elliot whispered. "You handed me away," the shadow replied. "I'm only collecting what was included." Elliot stepped forward. "She deserves to remember me." The shadow tilted its head, then pay again. The temperature dropped. "What do you want?" Elliot asked. "What you kept." The stranger appeared between heartbeats. "You were warned," he said calmly. Elliot didn't turn. "Tell me how to stop this." The man folded his hands. "The exchange is fair. You traded your shadow for her healing. But memory is a different currency." Elliot's voice trembled. "She's losing me." "Not losing," the stranger corrected. "Rebalancing. The light no longer anchors you in her world. There has to be another way." "There is," the man said. "But it will hurt more." Elliot laughed quietly. "I'm already gone." The stranger met his eyes. "To be remembered. You must step back into the light fully. And the cost? Your place in her future." Elliot's heart stuttered. "Explain." The stranger gestured and the room shifted. Elliot saw Lila years from now, older, confident, smiling. She stood on a stage at a graduation ceremony, scanning the crowd. She didn't see him. She never would. "She will remember that she had a father," the stranger said, "but not who he was, not his face, not his sacrifices." Elliot shook his head violently. "That's not remembering." "It's peace," the man replied. "A clean life. No unanswered questions, no shadows." Elliot sank to his knees. He thought of bedtime stories, of scraped knees, of hospital nights and whispered promises. "What kind of father agrees to be erased?" he asked. The stranger's voice softened. "The kind who already chose." The next morning, Lila stood in the doorway of his study. Sir?" she said gently. "My teacher says a parent has to sign this." "Sir." Elliot took the paper, hands trembling. "I can do that." She smiled, relieved. "Thank you." She turned to leave, then paused. "You're really nice," she added. Something inside Elliot broke completely. That evening, he returned to the place where shadows waited. "I'll do it," he said. The stranger nodded once. Once complete, she will live freely, without questions, without gaps. "And me?" You will exist, the man replied, but never where she can see you. Elliot closed his eyes. He imagined Lila's future, bright, unburdened, untouched by bargains and costs she never asked for. I don't want her to be afraid, he whispered. The light around him intensified. The shadow stepped forward, merging briefly with him, warm, heavy, familiar. Then it passed through, taking something deeper than shape. The next day, Lila laughed easily. She moved through the house like it belonged to her again. When she passed Elliot in the hallway, she smiled politely, like one smiles at a kind stranger. Good morning, she said. Elliot returned the smile. Good morning. As she walked away, sunlight filled the space between them. This time, it left no doubt. Elliot Grayson no longer belonged to her world. Elliot woke to silence. It wasn't unusual. The house had become quiet over the months, the kind of quiet that felt like it waited for something to happen. But today the silence was different. It was complete, absolute, like the world itself had decided he no longer mattered. He moved through the rooms carefully, his footsteps softer than he remembered. The floorboards no longer creaked beneath him as they should. Even the air seemed to bend around him, acknowledging his absence. In the kitchen, the sunlight poured generously across the floor. Every shadow danced in harmony, except his. Elliot paused, resting his hand against the countertop. He could feel it still, the faint pulse of life, the remnants of what he had given. But to anyone else, he was already gone. Downstairs, Lila chattered happily with her friends over breakfast. Her laughter was light, clear, untouched by fear or memory of sickness. She was strong, healthy, alive. Elliot leaned against the doorway, watching. She hadn't noticed him, not yet, and perhaps she never would. He remembered the stranger's words. To be remembered, you must step back into the light fully, but the cost is your place in her future. Elliot had paid that price, and yet, as he watched Lila, he realized something deeper than loss. She was living the life he had bargained for, free, happy, secure, and that, in itself, was a kind of victory. The world outside responded as it always did to those without shadows. At the office, his employees no longer paused when he entered. Meetings continued without him. His name barely surfaced in news articles. Cameras sometimes glitched when pointed in his direction, producing static where his image should have been. And yet Elliot moved among them, unnoticed but present. He could still speak, still act, still influence, but only in fragments. He was like a wind blowing through a room, touching everything lightly but never leaving a mark. A strange freedom emerged. Without recognition, there were no expectations. Without presence, there were no demands. Elliot could exist in a world of light without anyone needing to acknowledge him. At night, he returned to the hill overlooking the city. From here, the streets stretched like veins of gold under the streetlights. The buildings, the people, the cars, all cast shadows, dark and clear, all except him. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he remembered every time he had held Lila in his arms, every night spent whispering promises to a fragile child, every sacrifice, every moment of despair and hope tangled together. He had sold his shadow, yes, but he had bought her life. Elliot opened his eyes and looked at the horizon. No one could see him, but he could see them. He could see her, free, unafraid, and unburdened. And in that invisible light, he finally understood. Love is not about recognition. It is about sacrifice. It is about being willing to disappear so someone else can live. The wind picked up, brushing across his face. A thought came, bittersweet and sharp. If love requires invisibility, can it still be called love? Elliot Grayson smiled faintly. Perhaps it could. Perhaps it must. And as he turned to leave the hill, blending into the night, a single question lingered in the space between shadows and light. If a father gives everything for his child, but the child never remembers him, does that love still exist? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Let us know what you think. If this story touched you, please like, share, and kindly hit the subscription button on your screen. Stay safe.